This podcast is brought to you by ShortsTV and is not affiliated with the Oscars or the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in any way.
Hello and welcome. You're listening to the ShortsTV podcast. I'm Carter Pilcher, and I'm joined, as always, by the awe-inspiring Rasha Goel.
I'm inspiring? Well, that is so good to know, Carter Pilcher. Thank you so much for that compliment.
You're welcome.
So how are you enjoying the run up to the Oscar ceremony? I mean, we're just a few days away.
The pressure's off of me. I voted, everything's done, and it's piling up, though, pretty much on all these nominees and directors. And today, we've got two guests, Ben Proudfoot and Kris Bowers, who are the directors of one of the nominated short documentaries, A Concerto is a Conversation.
That's right. And along with directing this short, Kris is also the subject. So the film centers around Kris's conversations with his grandfather about his life story from leaving the Jim Crow South to founding a successful business in Los Angeles.
My grandfather, he found out he has cancer a little while ago. I wanted to spend some more time with him and talk to him about his life, about our family, ask as much as I can before he passes.
Well, thank you both for being here today. As Carter and I start off, if you could both introduce yourselves and the roles that you play in this film.
Yeah, my name is Kris Bowers, and I'm co-director and composer and one of the subjects in A Concerto is a Conversation. Thanks for having us.
Multi-hyphenate.
Yeah.
I'm Ben, and I'm a co-director of A Concerto as a Conversation and a producer along with Kris.
Thank you for joining us today. This is a fantastic film. Can you guys start by telling us what inspired you to make A Concerto is a Conversation?
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, it really came from this first meeting that Ben and I had. Ben was approached by the LA Phil to make a short doc that looked at the intersection between music and Los Angeles, and he asked if I would be interested in talking about this violin concerto that I was working on, and he was interested in looking at this film composer working in the concert space. It just so happened the day that we met, I was coming from an event that was recognizing my grandfather at the cleaners that he owned. It was early in the morning, and I think I was running late to the meeting and a little dressed up. And as we were talking about what I've been working on and all of that kind of stuff, at some point found a way to talk about my grandfather's story and share what this event that I was coming from and how my grandfather had hitchhiked from the Panhandle in Florida and came here, and only a couple of years later, after having nothing, ended up owning this cleaners and really set the foundation for our family here. And Ben immediately was like, that's a much better story. How can we find a way to combine those things? And then it was in that meeting that we discussed. He asked if I would be willing to interview my grandfather and if we could, find a way to tell that story. And in that conversation, we talked about this idea of trying to look at my family's history from Jim Crow South to the Walt Disney Concert Hall and really pay tribute to my grandfather's story and how I wouldn't be at this concert hall had he not taken all these risks so many years ago.
Ben, how about you? It is quite a thing to be able to identify in all that story that Kris tells you. How do you identify what is the story? What you're going to make into a film, and especially in the documentary space? It's really tough, and you've made a ton of documentaries.
Yeah, I've made a few over the years. It's a good question. I think a documentary rewrites itself multiple times. It writes itself when you first sort of have an inkling of an idea. It rewrites it when you kind of work your way up to shooting it. It writes itself again when you're shooting it, and then it writes itself 15 different times when you're editing it. And then, of course, it writes itself again when somebody watches it and tells you what it really means. It's constantly a process of, especially in documentary, being open to different versions, being able to throw out your plans and really improvise and follow the strongest current. And Kris's grandfather's story was just something that came up. I think as an artist, probably your best tool is your instinct, that tug that you get. Ooh, that's good. That's worth following.
Kurt and I were talking about what was so interesting is the places where you shot, both of you looking straight into the camera or straight at each other. Like, there were a lot of stylistic choices that were used in this documentary. Would love for you both to comment on that.
That central kind of visual device is an expansion of the Errol Morris Interrotron technique, which is a teleprompter-based way of interviewing someone that achieves a direct eye line with the lens and thus with the audience. And I had always wanted to do two at the same time. So instead of the subject seeing the director, they would see the other person in the conversation, and vice versa, and we'd be rolling two cameras at once, which is how we did this in Concerto.
So the truth is, just so our listeners can get it, you are actually, whenever we see those, they're actually both sitting there speaking to each other, and you're just filming them face on as they talk to each other. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. So if you can imagine, in Chris's grandfather's living room, there are two cameras. One is pointed at Horace, one is pointed at Kris.
Right.
And each of them have a teleprompter, like a news anchor would read. But instead of words rolling up the teleprompter, they have a live feed of each other. So what they see is like a FaceTime feed of the other person. So both are looking at the other person's eyes, and meanwhile, both cameras are rolling. So what you see in the film, it's not a recreation, it's not scripted. I have a hard time explaining this to people. Well, how could you have done that, right? It is a live conversation that we filmed, and it lasted, 3 or 4 hours. And our editor, Lucas Dong, did an amazing job helping to boil that down into its essence in that 13-minute film.
It's pretty cool. It's an amazing trick to get that look. Part of what is arresting about your documentary is that full-on Kris looking at you, not from the side, not them looking in a different way, but them looking straight at you. You kind of become more vulnerable to their story, which is really clever. I thought that was an amazing technique. It's a lot of fun.
There was kind of two things we were aiming for throughout. There's obviously this moment where we knew we'd hear the concerto in its full form, and wanting to try to find a way to emotionally and instrumentation-wise build to that moment. We didn't have the budget to be able to record a full orchestra, but we definitely recorded a small live ensemble remotely. And so in order to build up to that, one of the things that Ben and I talked about doing was use some of the thematic material from the concerto itself to then weave through my grandfather's story, which was also really fun for me because, one, just as a film composer, being able to write, usually I'm trying to put myself in the character's shoes, and in this moment, putting myself in my grandfather's shoes throughout that composing process was really surreal and beautiful process. The other part of that too is that we talked about trying to use How Great Thou Art in some sort of way, and I did this kind of variation on that theme, and it appears a few times, and then I feel like that really connects to How Great Thou Art at the end credits in an interesting way musically.
Push you right in the corner.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
We're gonna make you real handsome here. You're gonna be ready to go.
Thank you, sir.
Growing up in the South was quite a thing for me. Bascom, Florida, as far back as I can remember. I think the plantation was the Bowers Plantation.
All 13 of you grew up in that house?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Now, how all of us stayed in 2 rooms, I don't know.
I have to say, Kris, this whole story, is in this season of difficult issues that we're dealing with as a country. This is one of the most hopeful and beautiful stories of that challenge and overcoming that challenge that I've seen. How did this go down in the Bowers family?
Yeah, it's been pretty amazing. I feel like my grandfather's been speechless this entire time. Like every time I call him with a new piece of news, he's like more and more blown away and doesn't really understand what's happening or why it's happening to him in an emotional way, and it's really beautiful to see him receive that, and our family is really excited about that, and also my family's been so proud of our history where I think this year's our 107th family reunion. We can go back to the first slave that was bought in New Orleans, and so to see our family story in some sort of way seen by this many people and felt by this many people feels really special. Yeah, so it's been a pretty magical time for lack of a better term, for sure.
How did he feel when he was watching the film?
He got emotional, which it says a lot for my grandfather. I've never seen him emotional like that. And every time I talk to him about it, it's this thank you feedback loop where he just feels incredibly appreciative that we did this and portray his story in this way. And I think Ben and I are just like, thank you. Like, this is your story. So we're just thankful to be able to share it. And so, yeah, it's something where he just feels like he couldn't even have imagined any of this. I think we just had this event the other day at the Cleaners that now my aunt owns, and he walked out and saw this like mural being painted of him and all these people there, and the first thing he said is, if my mama could see me now. He was like, I don't even know what she would say. And it's pretty sweet. Yeah.
Kris, I have to ask you, because I'm sure you've been asked about this line so many times, but the line that your grandfather says, and I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up. Never think that you're
Never
not
think that you're not supposed to be there, because you wouldn't be there if you wasn't supposed to be there.
to be there. I actually teared up when I heard that line, because as a woman of color, that resonated. I'm so sorry. I didn't expect to have tears.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, seriously. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
It really touched me, and I want to know how that line changed your life from who you were to before he said that to you, and who you are, Kris Bowers, today talking to us in this interview.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rasha. I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel like it's like still such a daily conversation. I think internally is kind of the main thing, but it's been so helpful. I think one of the other things that didn't even get into the film that was paired with that is that I kept asking him questions to try to get him to talk about a moment where he doubted himself and felt like he wasn't supposed to be in those spaces, or he didn't belong because of his education or his background or any of that. And at some point he started getting frustrated with me almost. And he was like, why would I ever doubt myself? He was like, everybody else around me is doubting me. The world is doubting me. Like, why would I do that to myself as well? And hearing him say that, I was just like, it sounded so simple, but it's so difficult for me not to do, essentially, just based on like all of the other things that have, for me personally, generated this like imposter syndrome that is pretty incessant. So I feel like the work ethic is really what at the end of the day made my grandfather successful and right. Really speaks to me, or even you, Rasha. I feel like that's really what it is at the end of the day, and trying to focus on that and remember that's why we belong, I guess. Yeah.
He's so strong. Like he stood in such conviction.
Yeah.
He didn't allow the world to really come in his way, and I just found that to be very inspiring in the time that he grew up.
Yeah, you could even probably do a story about his grandparents to figure out where that came from. I just feel like it's so fascinating how he is the way he is. Yeah.
And just going back to the production side too, real quick, we'd spoken to another filmmaker, and they were able to have Laura Dern come on board for their project, as you have had Ava DuVernay. How did that relationship conspire, or how did she become interested in the documentary?
Yeah, so that Ava and Kris are friends and collaborators.
Oh, right.
And Kris scored When They See Us, which is an epic 5-hour masterpiece. And so Kris and Ava had a really close working relationship on that project. And as we were ramping up to release the film, we thought maybe Ava might tweet it. We're like, wouldn't it be great if Ava could tweet our film? So we sort of came hat in hand, and she tells the story really a funny way, because she gets this message from her composer that he's directed a film, and she's like, oh God, what? Yeah, and then of course she watched it and she loved it and excited about the opportunity of helping us get it out there. And, this Oscar campaign has been incredible, but we also have a lot of ambitions to distribute the film in the classroom, in an educational setting, and she was super excited about that as well. So we teamed up, and she has been an absolute marvel, extraordinarily generous, and such a great champion of Kris and of the film.
I feel like she's such a huge force in our industry right now, and a force for good and a force for change. And I feel like she's going to have a generation of filmmakers that she's directly impacted or just impacted by the ripple effect of what she's doing. And so to have her support in this project and to see what Ben and I are trying to do with my grandfather's story, and like you said, anything else we can do with it as far as educational outreach and all of that, I feel pretty touched by.
It's amazing. Can I just take a shift a little bit? I'd just like to ask each of you to tell us about your Oscar journey. I mean, what was it like to be nominated?
The whole thing feels crazy and totally premature, and at least in my career, I just turned 30. I feel like I'm just getting going. We made this film out of love, out of wanting to make a tribute to Kris's grandfather, just do a good job. I mean, like I said, it started out as this 2 or 3 minute film about, will Kris be able to finish the concerto in time? And as it snowballed, and as opportunities presented themselves, we just continued to say yes to the investment, and yes to the challenge, and yes to the time and resources it would require to do it, to make it what it needed to be.
You were surprised to be nominated. Kris, were you surprised to be nominated?
Oh yeah, definitely. I feel like I was it's interesting leading up to those things, especially having gone through it as a composer, not with the Oscars actually, because I haven't even been eligible with Green Book. The score wasn't eligible, so I just went for like, it was like a field trip to the Oscars essentially. Like be on stage in the back, like peeking my head in. That's really just because I snuck up there essentially. Me and Linda Cardellini were running from the back, but I feel like it's any sort of award process when I feel like as a composer, it's such a frustrating process because there's so much that you can get wrapped up in thinking about the award and what it means and all that kind of stuff, and this time it feels incredible because it's my grandfather. I feel like for me it's just like I get to share this news with him, like if we knock on wood happen to win, like that's going to him, or like my grandparents. It's just like this is really exciting for them to be on this journey, and I'm happy that we were able to have a part in facilitating that. Yeah.
It's worth saying that when you make a documentary, you're really kind of facilitators. You are providing the filmmaking spotlight to a story that already exists. Right? We did not create the story. Horace Bowers and Kris Bowers created the story by living their lives. And so to me, when a documentary gets an award as a whole, sure, it's a celebration of the filmmaking, but really what it is it's a celebration of the story. And the story is Horace Bowers and Kris Bowers' life story. So I agree with Kris. The nomination is hugely exciting, but I think we both kind of slowly point our fingers over at Horace Bowers, because I think that's really what people are saying when they voted for us in the nomination process.
Beautifully said, and it's a beautiful, beautiful film.
Kris, what was that feeling like for you of seeing your piece of music played at the Disney Concert Hall?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, I went to music school at Colburn right across the street, and so I remember when Disney Hall was also built. I think I was 9 when they built the downtown location, and I started my private lessons and like theory and jazz lessons. All of that was there at Colburn, and Disney Hall always felt very daunting. It felt very like this like very serious space, and I feel like I started to get excited when they started having I feel like pretty early on they were really great at having jazz programming and like having certain people like Chris McBride or Herbie Hancock oversee some of their seasons and things like that. To being in the audience and hearing music that I wrote in that space just felt pretty wild. I think I still trying to find words for it. Yeah, for sure.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Fantastic. Congratulations to both of you. It's a great movie. We really wish you all the best in these next couple days as everybody finishes voting. This is a fabulous film, and it's something that definitely deserves every single kudo and win that it gets. It's a great movie.
Thanks so much, Carter.
Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you very much for helping bring it to the world, and thank you, Carter, and thank you, Rasha, for sharing your reaction to the film.
Yeah,
that's why we do it.
Wow, Rasha, thank you. That really was touching. Thank you for being so open. I really appreciate that. I'm sure our listeners did, and Kris did. You know, just to identify with the central chord in the film is great. And so thank you.
Thank you, Carter, for acknowledging that. And, you know, I just think given the circumstances and what we're all going through in our country at this time, it's just important to acknowledge how each of us as individuals are navigating through this life, through this journey with our experiences. And I just felt so compelled. And I for that moment, I mean, those words really, they did touch me. I cried when I watched the film and heard his grandfather say that. Like, they really hit my heart. And I love, Carter, I mean, tell me what you think of this. I loved seeing the connection of the two different generations. You know, I didn't get a chance to grow up with my grandparents. So for Kris to be able to spend that time with his grandfather and learn from him, and just to see how strong this man was and what he went through, I was really inspired by that.
Yeah, me too. I love that part of it. Just the real deep connection between the generations and between the two men. And I love the support, you know. I think like I said, I think it's just great that the grandfather was able to see that his grandson might be something great, and really supported him through that whole process. And he's turned out just like his grandfather thought he would.
Oh, absolutely. You see that with him because, you know, the grandfather was fighting against these odds, right? At a time where things were not easy for him. So I feel like that tenacity he sent over to his grandson, letting him know you can do anything, push through. So great film. I hope that our viewers have an opportunity to see it and see this wonderful piece of art.
Totally agree. And thank you for listening. And if you haven't subscribed, be sure to do so.